Fight! February 24th, 2014 marked the passing of Harold Ramis, the co-writer and star of Ghostbusters, one of the best films to come out of the 1980s. Ghostbusters was a huge part of my childhood, an important part of my childhood. So while Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson are busy trying to wrangle his spirit into a ghost trap so that he never truly has to leave us, I'll be honouring his memory by looking at one of the many licensed Ghostbusters titles to come out over the decades. There have been a number of Ghostbusters games released over the years, from this 1984 title which sees you at the helm of a Ghostbusters franchise tackling supernatural activity in Manhattan, to this piece of shit. Sanctum of Slime is... Nope, not touching it. It's that bad. Let's just move on. There have been 4 handheld Ghostbusters games, the most recent being the stylized version of Ghostbusters the video game, and the earliest being this tie-in for Ghostbusters 2, itself a port of New Ghostbusters 2 for the NES, albeit with different levels. New Ghostbusters 2 is my favourite Ghostbusters video game, and in my opinion one of the best games that HAL Laboratories has ever made, but that's not what we're going to be talking about this week. No, this week we're going to be talking about the handheld video game tie-in for the Real Ghostbusters, the animated series based on the movie. As if you didn't already know that. The Real Ghostbusters was released for the Game Boy in 1993, 2 years after the show had ended, and puts you in the shoes of everyone's favourite wisecracking buster of ghosts, Peter Venkman, as he tries to find his way out of a labyrinthine castle by collecting stars and using the unlicensed nuclear accelerator strapped to his back to destroy bricks. Not exactly sticking rigidly to the canon of the TV series there, and there's a good reason for that. It's not a Ghostbusters game. At all. See, earlier that year, the same game had been released in Japan as Mickey Mouse 4, the Magic Labyrinth, where it stars Disney's perpetually round-eared mascot as he drills through blocks and collects stars. And the year before that, it was released in Europe as Garfield Labyrinth, where you instead control that orange thing from the newspapers that hates Mondays, loves lasagna, and inexplicably knows how to use bombs and keys. You know, I always found Garfield's hatred of Mondays to be far funnier than we actually give it credit for. Of course, we hate Mondays. We're humans. We work. You know, Monday is the start of our work week, the end of our weekend, the end of our 2 days of freedom. But Garfield's a cat. He doesn't have any obligations, any responsibilities. I always thought it was a very intelligent and incisive piece of social commentary, and one that's often overlooked. So okay, I'm being told by my producer that if I don't shut the fuck up, he'll bludgeon me to death with a rowing oar. So... These 3 games are identical in almost every regard, save for the character sprite and the introduction. Mickey Mouse 4 adds Minnie Mouse to the intro, and Garfield Labyrinth replaces her with Odie, while in The Real Ghostbusters, Venkman is entering the castle alone, because he's Peter Venkman and he does what he wants. The Real Ghostbusters is arguably the superior version of the lot, as despite the obviously inferior graphics, Venkman doesn't look half as interesting as Mickey or Garfield, this version has 10 additional levels not present in the other versions. There's a long, boring story to explain how this one game got released in 3 separate territories sporting such wildly different licenses. Let's go into it now! In the late 80s, Kemco bought the rights to develop a Famicom game based on the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit and published it in 1989. But when they wanted to release it internationally, they discovered that Rare had already made an alarmingly dire game based on the film that same year. But rather than abandon plans to release the game internationally, they instead picked up the Looney Tunes license from Warner Brothers and retooled the game into the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle, replacing the game's enemies with other Looney Tunes characters like Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam and Wile E. Coyote. At the same time, they released a Game Boy version in Japan, but with the Roger Rabbit license having expired, Kemco opted instead to license another character from another studio, so while the American version features Bugs Bunny, in Japan the same game stars Mickey Mouse.
Don't worry, it gets weirder.
Mickey Mouse was successful enough that in 1991 Kemco released a sequel called Mickey Mouse 2 that was released in the States as the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle 2, but in Europe as Hugo, based on the Danish troll character popularised in the UK by an interactive game played on Saturday morning television. Then it was re-released 2 years later as Mickey Mouse, because why the fuck not? A third Mickey Mouse game was released for the Famicom in 1992, which ended up getting released in the States the following year as Kid Clown in Nightmare World, a tie-in game for the popular horrorcore hip-hop act Insane Clown Posse. That's not true. I'm lying. I made that up. Not even sorry.
Which brings us to Mickey Mouse 4 The Magic Labyrinth, which became Garfield Labyrinth, which then became The Real Ghostbusters, which pretty much covers how we got to this particular state of affairs. Except for one thing.
See, the key thing about The Real Ghostbusters, Garfield Labyrinth and Mickey Mouse 4 is that aside from replacing the lead, they're all basically the same game, same level, same everything. But they all share similarities with yet another game, PP Hammer and His Pneumatic Weapon for the Amiga and the Commodore 64, which uses the same basic premise of smashing blocks, collecting stars and unlocking doors with keys, and features some of the same levels. It even has a near-identical HUD, albeit displayed all at once rather than broken up in two to accommodate the Game Boy's teeny tiny screen. Now, there are no credits listed for The Real Ghostbusters, Garfield Labyrinth or Mickey Mouse 4 either in-game or online, so I've no way of knowing whether anybody who worked on PP Hammer also worked on these games, but PP Hammer was developed in Germany while Kemco are based in Japan, so I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
It's an odd discovery to make, and honestly, until I decided at the last minute to make this Ghostbusters episode, I had no idea that there was any link between these games, and now I want to do the research. I want to dig up more information on these two games, these 4 games. Jesus fucking Christ, Harold Ramis. In death, you've given me a wonderful gift, and a huge fucking mystery to solve. Maybe I'll get to solve it later in the year.